Hi, this is PatZi with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And I have two wonderful authors today, Margerret George and Brook Allen, and they will be telling us the stories behind their books. And we're going to talk particularly about Cleopatra and Mark Antony because they have both written books that just take you all the way to Egypt. So let's meet the authors, Margerret George and Brook Allen. Hi.
Hello.
So nice to be here.
Lovely to
Okay.
be here.
I am so happy to have you because I love both of your books. I love history. I particularly like biographies and autobiographies, as Margaret is so great at writing. When I think of Henry VIII, the autobiography, I think that is one of the best books about Henry VIII ever written. It is such a wonderful book. And then, of course, you like to get right into the character, and you did that with Cleopatra too. And so, tell us about Cleopatra and about your work on that and how you started that back in 1997.
No, it got published in 1997. Actually, I started it long before that. I had always been interested in her as a child. I think she just was so fascinating to me. And I think a lot of kids go through this ancient Egypt phase, and I was one of them. In fact, we had a unit about it in school. So really had wanted to write a book about her. And this was in the time before the internet. I mean, the kind of research that you could do now when things are digitalized and you have access to a lot more than I did. But back then, you did the best you could with papers that had been written, scholarly papers. You got to know the books that were reliable, they're not just kind of pop fiction or whatever. And you have to go to the place where her environment, because you want to know how they lived. And I don't think you can know somebody unless you spend time where they were. Like if someone 2,000 years from now wanted to know about you, they presumably would want to go and see the places where you live. But of course, they would be changed, which is part of the challenge, because although she was the queen of Egypt, she lived in Alexandria. Alexandria now is not anything like the Hellenistic city it was in her time, which was, like 60 BC on up to 30 BC. So you go there and you have to look for the layout of the streets are still somewhat the same. And the great harbor of Alexandria was the main thing about it. It had room for 1,200 boats. And the great lighthouse of Alexandria, which fell down in the Middle Ages, but some of the stones were used to build a little fort out where the old lighthouse was. So you can see that. But you have to use a lot of imagination to reconstruct what it was like then, because there's no Hellenistic city, there's no Greek city around anymore that you can say, well, I'll go visit that one instead. The other thing about Cleopatra is there's so much misinformation about her, and she's such a pop culture figure, and there've always been these popular songs about her, and uh, and she's really kind of belongs to the world as a kind of icon that doesn't have a lot to do with the real one. So I wanted to get at the real one, and did the best I could. But you always wonder if you'd meet the person, would they say, you really got it right? Or would they say, um, I didn't recognize myself. And that's the thing, you'll never know because you don't have a time machine. And
Well, I think, Margaret, this book, The Memoirs of Cleopatra, it is so brilliant. It is beautifully written. It is how many pages? Fine. With
960. And I do
not.
have to tell you that my my editor said there was a pool going on in the office about how many pages was it going to get to be, and who could guess the closest was going to win a prize. I think their goal was to make sure it was not 1,000, and of course a lot of that has to do with the size of the font. So, but it did come in at 960.
Well,
So
yeah, it was. It was. It's long, but it's funny. You just because it's so beautifully written, and you get lost in it. I remember when I got it, and I remember thinking, at the end, I was like, I wanted more. I mean, there's so
Oh,
much to this story, and now, of course, back in those days, it wasn't as easy as it is today. Is this one of the books you wrote by hand?
no, by that time I had been forced to switch to the computer just because of time constraints. I halfway through Mary Queen of Scots is when I had to switch. But one of the oddest things that ever experiences I had was when ABC TV made a miniseries out of it. Um, they actually had there was a character that I myself had invented. He was not historical, but he was kind of an old guy who kept snakes and then so here is this they here is this person that didn't exist except I made him up, and then they have this actor acting him, and they have I mean it was weird to see a book that was it was the scene that existed in my head suddenly came to life, and a lot of people were involved in setting it up and the wardrobe and the lighting and all that. It's very strange, but I guess in a way that's what you do when you write a book. You you have all of that going on in your mind, but no one else can see it.
Well,
Unlike
no, they
this.
can. Your readers can see it, and that's why you brought him to life. It's a character from your mind. You brought him to life,
Yeah,
and
the old snake man, the sort of the guru guy who took care of the snakes. So, I mean, I figured there had to be one, but
and I think you
anyway,
got it right. I think you got it right. And the wonderful thing about this book, as I said, it's so readable. It today probably you couldn't get it published at that number of pages. They don't do that
no,
for
no.
many people, and that was a big run. I think your first run was like 100,000 books. I mean, they poured those books out.
They did, and there were 20 foreign editions of it, and yeah, they often the foreign editions had to break them into you know, three or four series and make it into a trilogy, like yours, Brooke, because they often like in Spanish is longer than English, so that meant when you translate it into Spanish, it was even longer. So they had to make it into a trilogy for that. But it was fun to see all those different foreign editions of it, and know that people, even in Korea and Japan and you know Scandinavia, were reading this. It
Well,
was very very gratifying and but a strange feeling in a way.
Well, I think it's so wonderful when something like that happens, that you write a book and that people really just they fall in love with the book, and the characters that you've created around her too are fascinating. So we're going to talk about Cleopatra some more. Let's
Okay.
talk a little bit now to Brooke, and we're going to talk about, well, somebody very important in Cleopatra's
Yes.
life, and then the two of you are going to get together and really compare notes on this one, because of course, Brooke, you wrote Antonius, the son of Rome, and tell us about that.
My trilogy, it's kind of interesting. A little backstory here. Margaret George's work on Cleopatra was my inspiration for my entire trilogy. And it's so funny. I got to thinking one day, I would really want another author to know if my work had inspired, me to the point where I was going to write a book about one of those characters. And so I did. I decided to write Margaret a note just thanking her
Yeah.
for Wars of Cleopatra. And that is truly the way our relationship started.
That's
She wrote
right.
me back. So, yeah, the Antonius trilogy, I wanted to do something a little different. Mark Antony has been one of those classic uh, characters from, Julius Caesar from Shakespeare on. And of course, Plutarch did write pretty exhaustively about him at one point. So I wanted to do him justice. And to do that, there was part of Margaret George's book that Antony was speaking. And he said, my father died when I was about 10 or 11 years old.
Mhm.
And so that's where I decided to begin my book, was when his father died. And that was the very first novel that I wrote, Son of
Mhm.
Rome, based upon his childhood, his youth, and as a young man. He had kind of a wild teenage years. He was not probably the easiest person to be around. I'm sure being his mom would not have been much fun. But Mark Antony did impress because he was very courageous. And by the time he was sent by Julius Caesar to Athens, Greece, to study rhetoric and the foundation of his military career, at that point he did impress another person, that was Aulus Gabinius. He was headed east, and he was going to be working in Syria, which was kind of a brand new Roman province at the time. So Mark Antony wound up being his cavalry commander. And at that point, enter Cleopatra's situation, because her father was being restored to the throne by Aulus Gabinius. And so Antony would have had to meet Ptolemy the 12th himself, Auletes. He would have probably met Cleopatra at that time. And that's where my first novel ends. And the next novel picks up right around the time when he leaves Egypt and goes to join Julius Caesar in Gaul. And during that time, that was where he picked up a lot of real experience on the battlefield. And Caesar kind of threw him into the snake pit politics of Rome, and Antony was not the greatest politician. He would prefer much prefer to be on the battlefield. My second book ended after the Battle of Philippi. The one time that he and Octavian were in agreement, let's kick some serious Roman, Brutus and Cassius, and set them back a ways. So they did that, and the next book picks up right after that, and that's, of course, when he travels back to the east to meet Cleopatra. So
Okay, well, I have a little video I'm going to play for you that I did about the two of them, and then we'll come back and you guys can discuss the two most, I think they are still the most famous couple in ever. Okay, so here's a little video for you. Okay. Well, I thought that'd be a good introduction.
That was fun. That was so much fun.
that was wonderful.
Well, I had fun, and I was inspired by your books. So, where are we going to start? Now, Brooke, you mentioned where they met, but Margaret, why don't you lead into how Cleopatra got to that part?
Well, Cleopatra, has they often think of two parts of her life. There was the Julius Caesar part, which she got involved with him, first part of her life. And then after Caesar was assassinated, she and Antony, well, she knew Antony before, but how they got together really was because, as Brooke said, he called her to come to meet him in Antioch because he was questioning her loyalty. He didn't really think she would ever side with Octavian or anything, but but the people who had assassinated Caesar, I guess she hadn't really paid up her dues to help them fight against him. Anyway, she went, and there's the famous thing about how she came in this ship with perfume sails, and, the famous lines out of Shakespeare play, which is taken from Plutarch. I mean, pretty much word for word about the costumes and all that, and how that she was acting the part of Aphrodite, and he was Bacchus, or what was he? Then they became lovers on the spot, but it was all political on her part. But it's a wonderful meeting that you have to actually create yourself, though, because just those props aren't going to help you. You have to know what was their psychological involvement in it, right, Brooke? And the 2 feet of rose petals and all that business, and so and Antony had been around a lot. I mean, she ended up being, what was his fourth wife, or was it his fifth one? um, because he was actually married, I think, at the time. But anyway, so that's really how they met. Although it's true that they probably met when she was also a child, like 11 or 12, when he helped restore her father to the throne. But everything about them was kind of larger than life. I think that's why we think of Burton and Taylor that way, because they were, in their own way, they're kind of little replica of Cleopatra and Antony, with their extravagant lifestyle and her beauty, and both of them, having been proclaimed, she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and Burton was a great actor and all that. So I think that there was this drama, implicit in their lives. It was made it fun to write about it, because you could hardly overdo it. It was like, I think,
Well, Antony absolutely loved theater. He
yeah,
he was surrounded by actors and actresses, and that was scandalous among the
yeah,
Romans.
yeah. Well, yeah, he was a theatrical person, and I think that's one reason we remember all these gestures and things they did were so theatrical. It's said it's larger than life. So, did you find that you were influenced at all by the other depictions of them, like the Shakespeare one, and then the movies, and you know, they're surrounded, other interpretations are surrounding you all the time with them.
Yeah, that makes it hard. Sometimes you have to weed through those a little bit and try to seek out the truth. Honestly, I tried not to watch too many things.
Hmm.
I did watch HBO's Rome, and I was really sad that I did. I thought
Yeah,
that
me
they
too.
painted Antony
It,
ultra dark,
it was, I thought it was terrible, and it was not historical at all. And what was the
It was,
business about Antony's mother being seduced by somebody, and Octavian and his sister committing incest? I mean, it was just ridiculous.
yeah,
It
a
was
lot of it was
terrible.
quite,
Oh,
yeah.
and wasn't Cleopatra a crazy drug addict with this Butch
Oh, yeah, they
Harris?
had them
Yeah,
smoking weed, and yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. It was
Yeah.
yeah.
terrible.
But I found myself weeding through truth, and I tried my best to read a lot of novels and focus on historical, you know,
Hmm.
basically Tacitus and Plutarch, and you know the. I'll tell you who I really loved was Josephus. Josephus did a
Hmm.
lot of Mark Antony,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
when he was going into Egypt to put Ptolemy Auletes back on the throne, and that was really helpful. If I
yeah.
stuck to the primary sources, I found that I did a lot better trying to create his character than if I watched a lot of
Been watching Hollywood
television.
things. Yeah. What about Shakespeare, though? Was he kind of hard to navigate around? Because
I thought he got a lot more right than Hollywood does,
yeah, oh yeah.
but I didn't use him as much as
Mhm.
perhaps you did. I don't know. Um, Again, like I said, I really tried to stick to primary sources as much as I could, and a lot of scholarly works as secondary sources to really focus in on what his character was like. And I think what I was able to do in my trilogy was I was able to really pull out why Antony became the Antony we know.
Hmm.
um, why did he drink? Why was he a womanizer? Why
Mhm.
was he not feeling comfortable in the political arena? You know, why did he prefer the battlefield? And hopefully my trilogy kind of answered some of those questions. He certainly had no love for Cicero. He had reasons not to love Cicero. And but they started a lot earlier than um, the many letters Cicero wrote against him. It started all the way back in the Cataledian conspiracy with his stepfather. So there were reasons that he grew up the way he grew up, and having been raised in a republic that no longer functioned, that must
Yeah.
have been so hard. A government
Yeah.
that, I hate to say, somewhat like America is becoming.
Yeah. Well, well, I did find that I will say Shakespeare is got a lot more right than Hollywood for sure. But like at Antony's funeral speech, that was Shakespeare. The real one wasn't like that. It wasn't nearly as poetic, but
So,
it was different. It was different, and so those kind of things. What he added. But Cicero, Cleopatra didn't like him either, and he didn't like her. And so I had a scene where she meets him at this party in Rome, and Cicero, Alexandria had those books in the library, and you weren't allowed to take them out. You could read them there, but you couldn't take them out. And so Cicero wanted to borrow one, and she wouldn't let him, and he got mad. I mean, that's what I had it, and said nasty things, and she refused, and he just had it. He just didn't like her. I mean, it was like he never did. And so, I didn't like him either because of that. I, don't- I to this day I have a prejudice against Cicero when people say, "Oh, he's so wise," and read this, and I just think, "Oh, but he was a jerk."
he was a pompous sort, that's for
Yeah,
sure. He was really in love with himself.
yeah,
I think
he
he was a
sure was.
narcissist.
Yeah. So anyway, I I think that there's a lot of at the time that I started writing, started also the stuff about the Black Cleopatra and why are you repressing the truth and all that business. That was a hot topic. Um, so I think you're always navigating around the what's going on in people's minds now about the characters, um,
Mhm.
whether it's true or not. And I think that you got off more easily because I think there was less percolating around about Antony. Once the Burton movie was over, that one. I always thought Octavian was an interesting character, though I must say, he was he was a real worthy adversary, and
He was. He was a
he
brilliant
really
man.
was a brilliant man. What to say, the greatest statesman that Rome ever produced. He was very clever, and I did think the cat and mouse stuff with him and whoever his opponent was always fascinating. And unfortunately, he was always going to win. You knew he was always going to win in the end. It would be hard. It would be hard to triumph over him, but they did their best.
Hmm. They did. Yeah, the thing about Octavian is he was so brilliant, and he was able to maneuver the populace
Yeah,
so well. He would stage. There's been even a whole book. I'm trying to remember the author's name. It was a wonderful resource. Paul Zanker, I think, was his name.
oh yeah, oh the images on the
Yeah, the
coins and all that.
imagery,
Yeah,
Augusta
yeah,
imagery. And now if you go to the Palatine Hill, as I know we both have, and
yeah,
you wander around, you see all this dolphin imagery and,
yeah,
symbols of Apollo. Um, look where he planted that Actian Apollo temple right
yeah,
next to where he lived.
yeah,
That was something that was going to be inscribed upon his very psyche, his very being. And I think it's remarkable if you look carefully at some of that imagery that they have in some of the museums. There was one piece I saw that had Apollo, or a very godlike person, on one side, and
yeah,
then the other side was this Herculean figure.
yeah,
So it presented, Antony and Octavian on each side. There was just so much imagery, and he was so savvy at that type of
Oh, yeah.
propaganda.
And
Antony
he
was.
didn't, well, I don't think everybody knows about the Prima Porta, statue and the coins and so on, but I bet he didn't really look like that. I mean, he's made stunningly handsome in these, in the statues and the coins. But he probably was, well, we know he was short, and we know that he was kind of sickly and spindly and everything. And maybe he had a great presence or something, and you would think of him as looking different. But he was very clever, and I think, and he wouldn't let himself. I guess when he went out of his sun hat to protect himself and his elevator sandals and all this stuff that he did, but it doesn't show up in the statues. So yeah,
There
he
is
looks.
there is one image I've seen of him. It's in the Capitoline Museum, um, and it's a bust, and it was a pre. Well, it was probably done around the time of Caesar's assassination.
Mm-hmm,
He's got his morning beard on,
mm-hmm.
and for the only time I've ever seen what I think was probably a pretty veristic
Uh-huh.
likeness of him. And his nose was more sloping. He didn't have the Grecian features of
Uh-huh.
his other real
Yeah.
iconic prima
Mm-hmm.
porta, you know, Augustus type of
Yeah.
statuary. And it's really a cool bust. If you ever go back to the Capitoline, I think we should go to Rome together, Margaret. I really
Yeah,
do think so.
definitely. Yes. I think I may know the one you're talking about, because I
Yeah,
didn't look at
yeah.
most of them and take photos, but yeah, I think I had seen one in which he was much plainer and more,
Hmm.
ordinary looking. Come to think of it, though, isn't it a shame that we really don't have a statue of Cleopatra that we know it really is a statue of her? I mean, there are a lot that they say this must be her, but the coins, and there are two types. There's the ones that were Egyptian, where her profile is very lovely, and then there's the Roman one where she looks like an old battle axe. In fact, someone said she looks like Antony with a wig on. And was that Roman to make it seem as if she was formidable, or that she was not attractive, or why would they have? Didn't she have any say in the coins and what they looked like, or not? Or was there
Well,
a political reason?
yeah, I think if you look at many of those coins, though, coinage, it was so small, for one thing, to
Yeah,
put an image on a coin. And all of it had to be, hand inscribed and then stamped.
yeah,
And, I look at ones of Julius Caesar, look how scrawny his neck is.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, he looks like a chicken's neck.
It's
It's hilarious. But and then Antony looks like a boxer, and
yeah,
has this kind of weird bony nose. And then there's the Cleopatra one that you're talking about that has kind of this profoundly rounded, sharp witch
yeah.
nose.
And a
And
big, a big chin, a chin that sticks way out.
yeah,
Yeah,
chin that like Antony's, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think it was just really hard for them artistically
yeah,
to create something so small in metal, with a
yeah,
stamp and everything. I don't know. Maybe that was part of it. Of
yeah,
course, then you get these lovely intaglios and stuff from the period that look so much better. So you
yeah,
don't. I
yeah,
don't know. Maybe the artists that they hired for intaglios were far better at their craft than coinage
yeah.
artists. I
Or
don't know.
easier. Yeah. I do think that I get so disturbed when they're still searching for Cleopatra and Antony's tomb, and I hope they never find it, because they're they're a legend. They're magic, and all they'd find is a mummy all wrapped up. And they would, you don't really want to see that. I mean, I don't want them to find the tomb,
After
but
all they
hopefully
went through at the end, they deserve some peace, don't they?
they do, but they're always, these things always turn out not to be real. They say we think we found it, but they aren't. So yeah, I mean, some people should be left in legend, and certainly you shouldn't be digging up their mummy and running DNA tests on it and doing all that. It would be
Now,
terrible.
how old were they at the time of their deaths? How old were each of them?
Cleopatra was 39, I believe,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Antony was, I think around 53.
Yeah. He was in his 50s and
I think.
young by today's standards, you know.
Yeah. Of course, I think people aged a little,
Yeah.
less gracefully back in those days. Even somebody at the top, as they were, um, they would not have aged as gracefully, I think, as people in the 21st century.
No, it was a harder
So
life. I mean, you
it
know,
was.
Who
so,
picked their burial ground? Who was that? And
well,
Well, probably
Cleopatra, I
Cleopatra.
guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't, you know, she was a big mausoleum with, you know, it was like a kind of temple, and it was a building that was above ground because we know that there were two stories to it, and she was in there with all her treasure, and so I think that that was meant to be. She must have started building it many years before, planning on it,
Mhm.
and it wasn't really quite finished. I think by the time that they
No, it
died.
wasn't. In fact, supposedly it was some of the scaffolding that workers were using to get up and down in some of
Yeah,
the rooftop areas that Antony was placed on to
yeah,
heave him up to the queen when he was so badly wounded,
yeah,
self-inflicted wound. So,
yeah.
yeah, I hope
That
they don't find it either. I think leave them alone.
I
yeah,
think
you
Margaret
know, there's
is right. I think that they deserve their peace. I
they
do.
deserve their peace. Yep, yep. In a way, though, I was thinking it's a little bit like Romeo and Juliet, where he thinks she's dead, so then he kills himself, tries to, but she's not really dead. So he expires in her arms. Of course, and then Cleopatra kills herself too. So yeah, with the asp. So yeah, it's a little like that, you know.
It is. It was the first Romeo and Juliet, the
It's the
original.
first Romeo and Juliet. Yeah. You wonder if
The
it
original
did influence Shakespeare, except that he
could
wrote
have.
Antony and Cleopatra after Romeo and Juliet. But it is true. It's like the miscommunication, you know, between the two, like that. So, well, it's
The
a
fog of
supremely,
war.
yeah, it's a supremely poignant and romantic and really a very special glimpse into these characters, and they're more alive for us than many other people in that era, for sure. Um, and I just guess we've it's always held a fascination for us. And the Roman propaganda against her, of course, helped because it built her up as like, you know, more than just a woman. She was had such power that nobody within 200 miles was safe from her. All Roman generals would fall under her spell, and she was, you know, I mean, and so you give that kind of PR to somebody, and then of course it lingers. That's what she takes it with her to the grave, and how much of it was an exaggeration, we don't know.
Now, both of you, of course, did a lot of research and did a lot of traveling. So, Margaret, you want to explain when you first rode your first camel?
Oh, well, my father was in the Foreign Service, so we were stationed, actually, that is, in the Middle East when I was 7, 8, and 9. So that's when I got to ride a camel, and probably when I got, you know, feeling at home in that environment, you know, with camels and palm trees and things like that, tombs. Um, and I wrote this Cleopatra report when I was in fifth grade, I think. I still have it somewhere or other.
When I was over there, I did ride a camel, but my thing was I'd always wanted to ride a horse around the Great Pyramid.
Uh,
And so on the day that I was at Giza, that's what I did is I hired one of those horses, and some of their tack, is just not very very safe. I hate to
uh,
say, and I was riding and I was cantering behind the guy, and my stirrups broke. And
oh,
fortunately, I ride a lot, or I used to, and I was fine. I recovered and everything, but the stirrups, were back a ways. And so I thought to myself, well, in a way, this is kind of cool because this is the way the Romans would have ridden horses
yeah,
without stirrups.
that's right.
So
That's
I
right.
was
Because
like,
they
oh,
weren't,
how appropriate. I'm so glad that the Egyptian gods, whoever they are, if they're around, let my stirrups fall off today because now I feel more Roman. This is great.
Yeah,
And
that's great. That's a great story. Yeah. Um, I do think that I remember one thing with the camels. They were filled with fleas, I guess, because one of them, when he got off of it, the camel lay down and went, and he got on the ground, he just wiggled and everything, and get his back scratched. And they were really kind of moth-eaten camels that were around. uh, well, I once wanted to go on a camel trekking trip, but no more. I mean, I thought it would be exotic, but they do have those things. They have these caravan trips on camels, but they're probably all flea bitten too.
Yeah, unfortunately, Egypt doesn't take very good care of their animals. I think they're
No.
in a state of poverty over there in some of these places, unfortunately. But
Yeah,
anyway, it's still a fascinating place to visit. The
it
culture, the
is.
food, just I fell in love with the culture. I really did. The
Yeah,
music is amazing.
in a way, I like to go back there again. I don't know how much has changed, or does it ever change very much. Um, but it is a fascinating place, and I the there's something about the atmosphere. I wanted to go see one part of Cleopatra that I had not been able to see, was the part when I had her go down to all the to Nubia, to all the cataracts, and I had to do all the research about what they look like, because a lot of them aren't there anymore because they've cleared them, and they got dams on, But so I did go. There was sort of the last train out to Sudan in early 2019, and right before the revolution. In fact, people were being warned not to go. But anyway, I had written this scene there about Cleopatra meeting the Kandaki, the queen of Nubia, and her tomb. And I was just delighted to see it was just like I wrote it. It looked just like it. And that was kind of like the last part of the book, even though I did it. It was like 20 years later, and I still had never seen those things. And that's part of what you have to do if you can't go there. You have to try to make it as real as possible. But what a delight to finally go there and see that that's where it was. It just so anyway, that was I that was the last gasp of Cleopatra, I guess, from my
well, that was
research,
rather
which was
brave
long.
of you. I remember at the time when you told me you were making that trip, and I was worried. I was worried because
So was
it was I
everybody,
knew
really.
the problems that were happening in that area of the world.
Yeah, it was a
Sure
little
don't want to go
scary.
now.
Yeah, it was a
No.
little scary. And then after that, they did have the revolution, and then things looked promising. They could go get a new government, and there was going to be a half civilian and half military. And then, of course, as one might have predicted, it fell apart, and now it's worse off than I think it was when I was there. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can go there anymore. I don't think they hardly have any transportation in and out of it now.
I think that's right. Now, for you, Brooke, you traveled to Greece and to Turkey.
Yeah, Antony spent an enormous amount of time in Greece. Some of his greatest victory and his
Yeah.
final defeat were both in
Mhm.
Greece. I spent some wonderful time with a Greek scholar in Actium, well, the area where Actium was, which was, of course, the big defeat of Antony and Cleopatra, and the bay there. And I think the thing that really just blew my socks off was the enormity of the theater of war there. I mean,
Mm.
we're talking in excess of a 50-mile radius where those ships were, where the encampments were, um, where they had to maneuver around and try to win a war, both sides. And it
Yeah.
just absolutely floored me.
How many soldiers did each side have? Because I've been there. We drove through Greece and then on through Turkey and then on to Iran. So we went through all of this area and we were there. But tell everyone the number of soldiers they had. How did they get all these?
Well, I think the largest number of soldiers that Antony ever commanded was the joint army of his and Octavian's at Philippi. And I think they had between scholars argue, but I'm going to say probably around 200,000 to 225,000 Roman soldiers in that combined army. And that was like 20 legions. It was a huge army. By the time Antony got to Actium, I think he was working with just a few legions and a lot of hired soldiers or commanded soldiers, under his governance in the East. And so that's one of the reasons, unfortunately, things didn't go so well for him at Actium, was a lot of them were able to be bought off, betrayed him, turned their backs on him. There was disease in his encampment. Octavian got there before he was able to get the high ground. And so Octavian was up on this huge ridge overlooking the Bay of Actium. Antony was down on these sandbars down there. And I can see where he would have just felt so trapped. There was just no winning the war. It was just a really tough situation.
Yeah, and there was some malaria down there too, and all the mosquitoes, and it was really unpleasant down there.
It was really bad. They were really suffering. And of course there became a scarcity of food, and they were pretty much trapped there. Agrippa was Octavian's secret weapon. Octavian could not have won that war. He would not have won that war had it not been for Marcus Agrippa.
Yeah.
He was a phenomenal soldier and turned out to be a very fine admiral as well. So I think Antony, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to state that I think Antony would have had a much finer turnout with men staying by his side, and he would have had a better chance had he decided to fight on land.
Oh, yeah.
And he had so much pressure on him not to make that choice because of the huge fleet Cleopatra had supplied him with.
Yeah.
So,
anyway. But I know that, like, Agrippa had set up that training ground in Italy with a lake, so those people could train in the wintertime in a sheltered. His rowers could train in a sheltered training ground, and that so he could strike early. I mean, he did not have to wait until the spring got advanced before they could train, and it was very clever. Very clever.
Yeah.
I must say that, without Agrippa, that's the luck of war, I mean, so many things have to do with luck too, just luck. Is it raining on the day of the battle, or did so-and-so get sick, or did the such and such not show up, or
did not come up when they were expected, right, Margaret?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
The logistics of this battle, so, nowadays, if we send 10,000 troops somewhere, we need all this stuff, everything, and we have it stored, and we have it packaged, and we have it. And here, they went out there so many, when you think about it, and as you say, it's such a large area, and it was just jam-packed, and how they did it, I still don't understand how they managed to do it when, they didn't have any air conditioning. They didn't have any trucks. And then, it's really, really hard sometimes to comprehend it. Nobody has quite captured it except you, Brooke. I have to say, I love, I have a lot of books about war. I have 200 Napoleon books, 200 books about World War I and World War II. So and one of my husband was so wonderful. I could get him to take me anywhere. All I had to say is there was a battlefield. And he would, I would have romantic weekends in any place in Europe. And I'd say, let's go for a weekend. If there's a battlefield around, he'd take me. So when you think of them at Actium, the massive number of people, and it's really quite amazing.
Yeah. There's a lot of manpower, from the rowers who were trained rowers. They weren't slaves like Ben-Hur and Ben-Hur. These guys were really, really well trained. But, the manpower involved, the medical staff involved, the dog trainers involved. Romans used dogs in war. The horse trainers involved with cavalry. It's just, it's mind-boggling to see. You're right. The red tape that went into everything, and the fact that this was before computers, cell phones. This is before every type of communication device we could imagine, and yet they did it, and they did it very efficiently. They were extremely efficient. So it's crazy. That's what makes the ancient world so cool, I think.
Yeah, I think because it's so much harder to do what they did, and you kind of wonder how they could do it. It almost seems miraculous, and so you're fascinated by it. Whereas here we have so much logistical help and all the reconnaissance planes and the night goggles and you name it. We have every kind of a device that can help you, and we can get supplies in by helicopters and things like that. Which if Antony was way down in there in the flats below, no helicopter is going to land or even drop stuff to him. That's not possible. So yeah, it makes it a much steeper game than what we're used to having to deal with. So that's what makes it exciting.
Yep. And that adds fuel to the drama fire when you're writing. It makes it so fun to write.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Brook, you concentrated in the beginning. The first book, Antonius, really talks about his early life and a lot about his mother, a lot about his family. So just talk a little bit about that, and then Margaret, perhaps then you could tell us about Cleopatra's children.
Okay.
Yeah. Antony was just like any other family. His family, he had two brothers that we know about. He was the oldest, so therefore he inherited his father's name, Marcus Antonius. His father, unfortunately, made a deal with pirates when he was supposed to be annihilating them. And because he treated with them, he was called pretty much a traitor by the Roman Senate. And Antony's family was in disgrace at that point. And that's where my book kind of starts and takes off. In my relationship building between the family, Julia Antonia, she was just an amazing woman. And she was probably my favorite character to really flesh out in the first two books. She was a mother that Antony would have been proud of. She was a very courageous woman. She was not afraid to stand up to her son as well as her husband or anyone else. She did some very, very brave acts, even escaping and getting to it was Sextus Pompeius, back when Antony and Octavian were just about kill him. And he, in turn, brought her to Antony. And Antony backed off and allowed Sextus to live. And it was Octavian who pretty much kind of pushed him into Antony to take action and disposing of him. But Antony's mom was extremely instrumental in her son's career. So, yeah. And I'm so sorry my chimes just went off. I'm so sorry, Patsy.
I like them. I was just going to say, whose chimes are they? That's really cool.
They're mine. I'm terribly sorry.
It must be the top of the hour.
It is, yeah. 7.
I love it.
Well, thank you.
It's better than a cell phone going off.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. It's not my ringtone, I promise.
It'd make a nice ringtone.
Yeah, I like chimes too. So you wanted to know about Cleopatra's children. Well, for one thing, I think the image of Cleopatra, the serpent of the Nile, people don't realize she had 4 children. It's kind of like and twins, two single kids and then these twins. So that sort of, in a way, gives you a different slant on her. Now, her first child was by Julius Caesar, Caesarion they called him, or they called him Ptolemy Caesar, which was pretty nervy of her. But Caesar recognized him. I mean, he didn't, oh, it's not mine, or don't give him that name. But of course, that made him the target of Octavian. He had to get rid of him later on. He was already about 17 or 18 before Antony and Cleopatra were defeated, and then Octavian was able to get his hands on Caesarion, who had been sent away for safety almost down to Africa, but his tutor betrayed him. Octavian remembered, they said, that it's not good to have too many Caesars. So the fact that a living heir of Julius Caesar was around could not be permitted. But she had 3 children by Antony. She had the twins, who she named Cleopatra Selene and Alexander Helios, and the Greek idea that one is the moon and one's the sun. And they were going to, she actually, had Antony give them a big heritage of much Roman land. That's one thing that infuriated the Romans. He had bequeathed as his inheritance, his children by this foreign queen, Roman territory. And so they too, interestingly, then they had a little boy named Ptolemy Philadelphus. So after Antony and Cleopatra had died, and Octavian actually took back the 3 kids of Antony's. Very interesting story, because he brought up the long-suffering former wife of Antony had to bring up these children in her household. And the only one you ever really hear about is the girl who survived. We don't know what happened to the boys. We assume that they either died natural deaths early, or they were bumped off, just like their brother Caesarion. But Cleopatra Selene ended up marrying Juba II of Mauritania. She became a queen of that country and tried to emulate, build a little Alexandria there in Africa on the coast of the Mediterranean. I think she's really interesting. I would have liked to have gone to visit the city that she founded. And I thought, being Cleopatra's daughter, I mean, that's a hard act to follow. But she tried to make another Alexandria. Whether she was trying to be Cleopatra again, I don't know. But her name was Cleopatra Selene. There's a big burial place of her, a great big kind of a tomb with a lot of rocks on it. It's in what's present-day Algeria, but I've never been there. I would like to be there. And I've always thought that she would make an interesting character to write about, the psychology of it again. Cleopatra's Daughter. There have been a number of books written with that title, and I think people are fascinated with her. So that's what happened to the 2 boys. Vanished. I like to imagine, this is my complete construct. Okay, how would you get rid of these heirs to Antony? Well, you marry them off to low-ranking women, and you put them in the army. So my fantasy is that they went off to Britain in the army, and with Caesar, and then they married one of my ancestors. So that's why I'm related to them.
I love that.
That's a very clever
So
idea.
I spun this whole thing.
Descendant.
Well, if that happened, I don't know.
So it's in your blood.
It's in my
This-
blood. That's right.
It was meant to be that you would write this.
I would write
Well,
this
you
book.
even used one of them in, was it Philadelphus, or was it,
Yeah.
you used one of them in your Nero series, your duology.
Yes, I did. Yes,
I thought it was great.
Yes, that he had lived, because I figured it out exactly that, okay, he could be alive, he'd be really old, and he had been in the army, right? And so he tells Nero that he's passing on this legacy of Cleopatra, of the coin and everything, to him as because he was a descendant of Mark Antony, Nero. In fact, on 2 sides, he was descended from both of the Antonius. And so Nero was a descendant of Mark Antony, and not of Cleopatra, but of Mark Antony. So anyway, yes, I had to carry this fantasy all into the book. Oh, well.
And,
I thought
and
that
then,
was well played.
so then, with your obsession with Henry VIII, do you feel that you're somehow related to Henry VIII?
No, I don't. I really don't. It's funny, because it'd be much easier to imagine you're descended from somebody that died only 500 years ago instead of 2,000. But no, I don't think so.
So you're not a relative of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex or anything.
No, I'm not a relative. Nope, nope. But yeah, a lot of people love to have say, I'm a direct descendant of Mary Queen of Scots. I've had people write me that, and people that have written the book, and they'll say, "Well, I'm a direct descendant of Mary Queen of Scots," and maybe, and then other ones that they say they're a direct descendant of Cleopatra and other things like that. That they don't specify how, but they say, "Well, I know this is true because it's been in my family, legend in my family."
And what about you, Brooke? Who are you related to?
Oh, I'm just Brooke. I just embrace my characters and let them speak at me. And there have been times like going going into the um oh, what is it? It's one of the monuments in Rome that was built in the
Oh,
Republic period. I'm having a brain hiccup here. This is really bad. But I went in there and I knew that Antony and Caesar and Cicero and everybody would have walked through that building. And I
mhm.
started crying. That place really spoke to me. It was just
Yeah,
amazing. The Palatine Hill, it speaks to
yes,
me.
Palatine
I get up
Hill.
there, and there's a certain area in the Palatine Hill that I have to just stop, and I just feel that this was where Antony's family's home was. Stupid,
Mm,
but
No, it's
weird.
not. I get the
no.
same feeling when I've been in Europe. I lived there a long time, so we traveled a lot. My honeymoon, my first honeymoon, was doing the Appian Way. We did the Appian Way, although I mean it was fantastic, and we had a white Cadillac at the time, so that's that's an interesting way to do the Appian Way. But where where you are, particularly in Rome, and if you know the history, and if you've like read Margaret's book and now your books, Brooke, you feel it. You're walking the
Yeah,
streets, and and you sometimes, in particular, I would find because I'm when we were young, we'd get up early. I always love to be. I'm always up early. In those days, one could venture out early in the morning and didn't worry about crime or anything. I love the morning, and somehow in the morning, I would really feel connected to the history of the
yeah,
locations I was in.
So
That
much to see
yeah,
over there.
yeah,
and it's wonderful what you've done. You've kept these stories alive. You brought new characters to life, but it's just part of the joy of writing and reading and just sharing these ideas. And we hope we get more people reading because sometimes you need to use those brain cells.
yeah.
One of the things that I've discovered as I've been doing all this, I celebrated the 9th anniversary of Joy on Paper, and over the years, one of the things that I really believe in is that people should read more. So your books are great. And Margaret, I have a idea for taking Henry VIII, and which we'll talk about. I showed you some of my
Yeah.
ideas, but
Here's the great, big,
Yeah,
enormous thing. There it is.
that's
Patsy
it.
has right, Margaret?
That's
Good
wonderful.
job.
It's wonderful. It's fantastic. I want to thank you both for being on Joy on Paper today to talk about Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And we will be having you back because I want to do separate ones for your books. Margaret, I want to talk about both Mary, Queen of Scots, and then, of course, a lot about Henry VIII. And Brooke, you have a new book coming. I'll give you a chance to give your website so you can tell people about your books. And here's yours, Margaret. What can they find on your website?
Research and various things, even what you can serve at the book club. If you use it at your book club, what would you serve to eat with these books? A lot of things like that. Just fun stuff, I think, and a lot of photos. They used to do a lot of photos
And then Brook Allen.
I would love for everybody to check out my website. Subscribe, brookallenauthor.com is my address. And I send out only one email a week, I promise, and that is usually a blog post or an excerpt from a historical novel. I try to stick to historical fiction. And I do have a brand new book out called West of Santa Lane about William Clark, the explorer's first wife.
So we're going to set up another interview.
Thank
yes,
you.
I forgot to say, I guess mine is also is margaretgeorge.com. So our websites have our names within .com.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Okay.
great. Been great visiting with you, Brooke. I miss seeing you,
Absolutely.
you know. We'll have to,
I talk
we'll
about
have
a
to make
dream in this
seven.
author's
Yeah.
life. Margaret's always been my favorite author, and here I am with my favorite best-selling author, and we
Uh,
get to have a chat and interview together.
yeah. Well,
Thank you
that's
so
Yeah.
much, Patsy.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah.
well.
We
This
really had,
this
and we
is
had a
fun.
great time. Yeah. Last time we saw each other, we had a great time in Texas at the
Oh, we
Historical
did.
Novel Society together. It was great.
Okay.
I owe
Well.
you an email, my friend. You'll hear from me.
Okay. Thank you both so much for joining
Okay.
me.
Thank you. Thank you so
It's been
much.
it's been a joy to see you, and of course, Margaret. I never forget the tea party that you gave me up there
Let's
in
see.
Wisconsin. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, it was fun. It was
Okay.
fun. Thank you. Good
Thanks.
night, all.
Okay.
Good. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too.
Okay. Wow. That was so much fun. I so enjoyed getting to talk to them, getting to see them. And I've invited both of them back. Brook Allen's book, new book about the wife of, of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And so we're going to have a wonderful interview with her. And do visit her website. She has a wonderful, lots of photos about her travels when she was working on Antonius, and you will really find them interesting. And she also writes a great blog. And for Margaret George, I just want to again thank her so much for joining us today, because I love all her books, and I'm telling you, the Memoirs of Cleopatra is great. I read it back in the day when I remember when it came out, because I was very excited about it. And if you think that's a little too daunting for you right now to read 900 pages, the Audible book is really wonderful. It's quite a few hours, but you get your money's worth, I can tell you. I just turn it on sometimes. I love the audiobook. So do get that. And as I said, I'm going to have, I'm going to have, I'm going to have a lot of things coming up. And one of them, of course, is that both interviews with them. And I want to particularly thank again Margaret George. I didn't mention during the interview that, you know, when I went to Wisconsin, and she was she did a beautiful, proper British style afternoon tea in her lovely home, and overlooking a beautiful garden, and it was so much fun. But one of the highlights of my trip there was that I got to meet Troilus, who has been in the family for over 30 years, and he is a tortoise. And I think he's much older than that. I think somewhere in his 50s, but she's had him for over 30 years. And she actually wrote a book about about a tortoise. And I thought that you'd like to see a little bit, just the cover of the book. And I'll show that to you in a minute. Again, I want to thank both of them for being on Joy on Paper Live. If you enjoy this interview, and you have to, because isn't it fun to see authors so excited and so knowledgeable? I mean, they don't need any notes. They know the people that they write about, and that's what makes it a joy to be a writer. And I hope that you will go to both of their websites, read their books, and come back to Joy on Paper Live next time I have an interview with them. And meanwhile, if you could subscribe, that would be so sweet of you, because I really do need subscribers. I want to keep uploading to my Patreon page. I am uploading as many of my radio interviews as I can, and I'm going to be uploading quite a few this week, including interviews with agents, literary agents. So if you're a writer and you're interested in literary agents, check out my Patreon page. Everything's free there. Later on, I'm going to have some book clubs that I'll charge something for, but it's free. You can make a $5 donation, but that's the maximum. And it doesn't matter if you're a best-selling author. You can make a $5 donation. And if you're not even writing a book yet, but you're dreaming of writing a book, you can donate $5. But that's all I want to ask you for, because I really, authors, well, everybody is right now stretched to the max. And I think that it would be, So, but people keep saying to me, "Oh, I want to give you something. I want to," and I say I can't because I can't. I don't want to be judgmental, and human nature being what it is. If somebody gave me $500, in my mind, would I think that they're nicer and better authors? I don't know. I hope not. But that's why I decided that I just want $5 as sort of just a little bit of kindness. But other than that, you don't have to, because all of the interviews, the radio interviews, are perfectly free, and you will be inspired. That's what, don't you see how these authors are having so much fun? That's what writing is all about, having fun, giving fun, and sharing in the joy. And now let's look at this little thing about Margaret's wonderful book. You see, you never have to give up. Sometimes life turns you around and you get upside down, but you can straighten yourself up and you can change your life. You can become a writer or you can become a reader, which is just as important and as fulfilling. It gives you a lot of joy. So please, if you could, if you have just 1 minute, it takes you 1 minute and you know how to do it because you probably know more about YouTube than I do. All I need you to do is to subscribe, because that's what they want. They want subscribers. And then like, comment, and share, because I particularly would love comments. I would love to know what books have influenced you and what books that and what authors you would like me to invite. So just please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening or day whenever you're listening to this. And remember, book lovers unite. And it makes your life more interesting, and you become more interesting. And perhaps this is a way to sort of get into that mode of life where you actually talk to people, to each other. Talk about the books that you're reading. It's a great way to get together, and there are lots of book clubs. So thank you again for watching Joy on Paper Live today. Please subscribe, like, and comment.